everything in this book kept me wanting to just next page. I just wanted to keep going with this, even when I was fucking terrified. Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. Yes, I have new hair again. What do you expect from me? I like the green. I'm not sure that the yellow really took properly, though I've always found directions dye to be a bit hit or miss. I'm not gonna say it, but I'm sure you all know what just went through my head. The green I like. I'm probably going to use that one a lot in the future. That will be my go-to green kind of thing. But the crazy colour yellow, it is nicer. It does work a lot better. So prob's going to stick with that. Let's get on with it, shall we? This week we have the horror double feature, the Grady Hendrix double feature. And let's start off with my best friend's Exorcism. I mean, I don't even know where to start with. Both of these books were phenomenal. This is super going to be one of those authors that I'm going to keep coming back to. I will say I am once again not scripted, so let's see how this goes. I just want to talk and ramble for a bit with this one, also because I didn't give myself enough time to script myself, so... But, you know, sometimes we don't have to script. So, yeah, my best friend's Exorcism. Vague synopsis, because I'm not fantastic at these without thinking about it. Basically, you have two friends. They've known each other since they were, I believe, 7. It was either like 7 or 9. It was, you know, they've known each other since they were quite young. And, you know, they've been friends like best, closest, just tight as anything friends until they're in their final year. Or second to last year. Actually, I believe they're sophomores, which I believe is your second to last year. Don't really know. It's not really the kind of phrasing we use all that much over here. So they're about 17. And they go out to this little like getaway party thing with a few of their other friends. And after what seems to be a bad trip for one of them, that's what they think at first, she disappears into the woods, and then once she's come back, she is distinctly different, and it gets worse and worse, and eventually they come to realise that there may be some demonic presences going on, and then it becomes a story of how to make her better, and it is just wonderful. It feels so much like an ode to classic horror movies. Not only have you got this kind of nostalgic 80s, mostly late 80s setting, you know, that always adds a bit of an air to it. You know, if you've watched Stranger Things, there is something about it. Particularly, I find for stuff like this, is you've immediately removed something in terms of the ability to call for help and the ability to easily access info. That's not directly mentioned in this, but the only contact they have is showing up in person, calling each other, but they're not really supposed to because obviously the costs, and yeah, like I said, seeing each other in person, calling, or sending letters and that kind of thing. So there's this break that we don't have now in being able to communicate to each other, being able to find information on what's going on. Like, you know, that scene in Twilight where she Googles vampires. Maybe I don't want that, but you know, these days you can sort of go, oh, my friend was vomiting the other day and there were feathers in it. What's going on? Then you might have your friend may be possessed by a demon. And there'll be a WikiHow article on how to perform an exorcism. Is there a WikiHow article on how to perform an exorcism? I'm sure I will find out later when I'm editing this. The tension building in this, I think, is. I mean, in both of them, but they work in very different ways. They're very different types of horror. This, like I said, it is very much an ode to classic horror. Obviously, The Exorcist is going to play in the back of your mind when you've got a young girl, she's only about 16, 17, not that much older than Linda Blair was when she did Exorcist. I believe she was about 12 or 13. So all things considered, she's not that much older. I don't know my horror history all that well. I watched some videos about it and some docs and stuff, but it's not like a huge area of interest for me. Apart from like in terms of storytelling, tension building, that kind of thing, horror is great for that, and also metaphor, be it subtle or not. Some do it better than others in terms of subtle metaphors, but you've got The Exorcist in there, and even when I said classic, that's like 80s, 90s kind of stuff. You've got Friday the 13th was a big one for me that I was thinking of. Pretty sure, yeah, Friday the 13th, Camp Crystal Lake, and all that sort of stuff. Right? I never watched it because I don't watch horror films very often because I'm easily scared. But yeah, like there's a lot of feel of the classic in that way, where I would say maybe it's got a 90s feel to it, but maybe that's just because I'm thinking of Scream, which is obviously a parody of the stuff that came before it in the 80s. So it's that this is a teen drama, but it's also a horror film kind of thing. And I will say, the teenage girls felt like teenage girls, which is always impressive when you've not got an author who's ever lived life as a teenage girl. Like, it didn't feel awkward and cringy in that way where sometimes in all sorts of media where you've got specifically older men, but honestly just generally older people in general, trying to reminisce of what people were like, either generally what girls were like at that point, or what they were like when they were younger, if you've got anybody who grew up as a teenage girl. There is sometimes that cringe factor of people just aren't like this at all or anymore, but you don't get that here, and I really like that because I'm thinking particularly of the sort of way that you get any teen fiction set specifically in a high school, and there's usually the three girls as a Mean Girls knockoff, or maybe you get the three and the other one in the Heathers kind of way. You get that a little bit here with the three and the other one, where you've got, so like Gretchen and Abby are the best mates, but Gretchen, Glee, and Margaret are like rich, and Abby's in that school because she's on a scholarship. So you do have a bit of that Heathers dynamic going on there, and I quite like bits of classic like tropes and stuff, as long as they don't feel cheap and cheesy, and like they don't feel tropey. It's not necessarily really obvious that you've got a bit of a Heathers dynamic going on here, and it works really well. Yeah, I absolutely, if you love classic horror in terms of your John Carpenter type stuff, or your Friday the 13th, all that jazz, or if you really like Scream. Actually, I think if you like Scream, I think you will like this. Similar vibes. If you like Heathers as well, you will like this. I know Heathers is not necessarily horror in that sense, but it's certainly not a typical teen drama at the same time. Yeah, just if you want that nostalgic 80s feel, bit of great horror, and there's some really visceral stuff in this as well. So the actual exorcism scene is horrendous, brilliantly written, but awful to read kind of thing. That's always hard to explain. Visceral as anything and genuinely heartbreaking. There is another heartbreaking scene, but I don't want to do spoilers because it's right towards the end. But there's a lot of stuff with animals in this. Not like torture in any particular way. You don't have to worry, this isn't some like serial killer type stuff, but there is some mistreatment of animals in the book, if that's the sort of thing you can't read. But then you can also read the mistreatment of people. It's a bit odd, but I do get it because animals are completely defenseless. I also have that thing in the back of my head where I maybe cry more at animal stuff than people stuff, but I cried at both in this. I just cannot recommend this enough. And like I say, the tension building of just that, it's building to this point where Gretchen, the girl who's been possessed, she's getting worse and worse, and she's never washing herself, she's wearing the same clothes, her hair's matted and a mess, and like she's never wearing makeup, and she's the sort of person that was always so put together. She was prim and proper, her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, everything, and it all just fell apart. And now she's grimy and gross and she smells, and at one point, to stop herself smelling, she's basically bathed herself in perfume, so it just doesn't make it any better. It's just a new kind of rancid. And then one day, like that, she's just normal again. If anything, she looks even better than she did before. She's had a haircut, her new clothes, her makeup's on point, all of that. And it's fucking weird. And you know something's happened, because you know that's not just Abby's gone a bit mad and she thought her friend was going through it, but everybody behaves like nothing happened, and Gretchen's just Gretchen again. Something weird must have happened in the woods, and there's all sorts going on with that, and like the bitch factor of all of it, because honestly, there is a bitchiness to the way her rich friends are, obviously, but it's done well because it's subtle. It's not like, again, in certain pieces of teen media, you get like the ultimate like bitchy mean girl, and I'll say something like a quick zinger to your face, and it's like, nobody talks like this. Even classics like Mean Girls do fall into that a little bit, but it's still funny and it doesn't feel cringe, whereas some of them it feels like no teenagers actually talk like this and you're just trying to sound like Mean Girls, and it's always a bit odd. But in this, it's like, this is how teenage girls talk to each other, which is mostly subtle until it gets to the point where it's a rough fight, and that it's handled so well. Like the type of bitchiness is just perfect. Next up, we have Horror Store, also by Grady Hendrix. Now, what I'm going to do now is hopefully get this right and show you what I didn't show you last week when I was going through this. So here we have the cover. If I've got this too high or anything, I'm going to be so sad. And if I do it again, I won't be surprised. And then we have the back cover. And then even the spine, it's all just perfect. Like we've got this with the map. And then if I find, we've got like a order form, like their little welcome to Orsk, you can expect this from us kind of thing. And got these. And then at the beginning of each chapter, we have these. And it's like a product description, so I'll read the first one. We have Bruker, a sofa that's everything you dreamed a sofa could be, with memory foam cushions and a high back that delivers the support your neck deserves. Bruker is the relaxing beginning to the end of your day. Available in forest green, aubergine, cardinal, and night. Then they got the dimensions and the item number. And you get that throughout. And then at the back, we have Grady Hendrix's like author photo done like a staff badge, which I quite like. And then what I will say is the kind of beehive map. I will leave it at that. And we've got all of this. And I'm going to leave the other part from the back hidden, because I think that's a really nice, it's not a spoiler, but it's a nice thing to find. That just feels like a full experience in a book. It's done so fucking well. This whole, like I said, it's just everything. When you're physically holding this book, it feels like a catalogue, you know, and you've got each chapter beginning with a different product. And I had the audiobook at one point reading along, and it has like these little jingles with it, just like a little doo-doo-doo, like nothing like fancy or anything, but he'd have that at the, so he'd be like, your Brusker is the perfect sofa for the end of your day, whatever that was. And they had a different voice actor to do those, and he had that really charming American, this is how we're talking. No, I'm not going to do the accent, but that kind of, like that, like sickly, sweet, deep voice that's like, on every American advert, that kind of thing. And then it had the little jingle at the end, and then it would go into it. And that, one of my favourite things about that is later on, when you're like really deep in the horror aspect of it, and don't worry, these aren't going to be spoilers, I'm not going to show you these. If I can find the first one, because that was the one that really did me in. Yeah, so what I love about this, like there's so many things, but I want to try to not show you the page itself. Do I have something I can cover that with? So you can see here, we have the, I mean, I don't even know if this is going to show, but I think that's roughly where my head usually is. So we've got that there. That looks just like the rest of the product descriptions. The difference being, so obviously that looks like relatively normal IKEA chair, but it's also got a thing that your head would go in, and it's got like ankle and arm constraints in places to strap you in. Bodavest. Boasting several advantages over the traditional forms of restraint, Bodavest confines the penitent and opposes the agitated movement of blood towards the brain, forcing the subject into a state of total immobility, conducive to self-reflection and free of stressful outside stimuli. Available in light oak and medium birch. That's what got me with that the first time, because just if you're just reading the audiobook, you don't get that. It will just finish with, and free of stressful outside stimuli. And then I think it just says, available at Orsk. I wish it, yeah, that's what, so like, you'll get the end of the, like, product description, and then he'll just go, available at Orsk, and then you get a little thing. There's something so wonderfully comical about the available in light oak and medium birch, and all of them have that. The little, like, here's what it's be available in X and Y material. It's little touches like that that really sell this book as a whole thing. And what I do love is that this isn't a zombie book, because it so easily could be. Because it is about how working in retail can feel like a prison, especially in those big warehouse type stores, IKEA being the obvious one. I believe in the US there's a few other things mentioned like that are designed perfectly to keep you there for as long as possible, to spend as much money as possible and keep you a little bit disorientated. Now, and obviously working there, you're still going to be in that mindset a little bit, and I super thought it might be zombies or something adjacent to, but it's not. It's a ghost story, and it's a phenomenal one. Now, at first, there is the use of the word zombies with the workers all coming into the store, and I think that is done on purpose. Because there's just, so if you don't know, by the way, with places like IKEA, they are all stores, in fact, but particularly anything that doesn't have windows, they're designed to in a very specific way. So when you walk into an IKEA, you've got all the like actual furniture bits. You know, you're walking through each hall, if you will. So you've got the living room area, the kitchen area, and they're all designed to keep you going in one direction, just swirling round until you get to the bottom. So you'll go through one floor, you go all the way around in one floor, and you'll maybe find some stuff in like they use the phrase impulse bins, which I think is great. So those are the sort of things where they'll put little trinkets and stuff in there, maybe like little snacks or something. In IKEA they do sell those kind of things, or like the little soft toys for kids, or little gadget accessories, those kinds of things. That you have a little look, and sometimes you go, oh, that's cheap, and then you pick it up and you realise why it's cheap. Those sorts of things. And then obviously that's not an area where you're going to be spending your big, that may be where you're spending your 1 or 2 purchase kind of money, ignoring your impulse buys. And then you go into the next area, which is maybe your lighting, usually. But then you've got your homeware stuff. Now homewares, actually no, I can't remember which way around it is, but it's then you've got your actual homeware type stuff. So all your little bits, which you're likely to go, oh, I could do with that kind of thing, or I could do with that. And then you end up in the actual warehouse where you have to get your big shit, and like you actually get on your trolleys and stuff. And then there's usually and then there's food everywhere. You know, you've got your food upstairs in whatever cafe, and then there's usually food downstairs as well, where you get like a hot dog. And even though you're full, you kind of still feel like you've had a full day there, so you still feel like eating again, because you can't work out how long you've been in there for, because there are 0 windows. The only glass you will ever get is maybe when you first walk in, and there's usually a lot of light going on in there, and then the rest of the time you are in there, there is not a single way to see out. And that is on purpose. It's the same reason that casinos do it. There's also no clocks that are functional. And that book really plays off of that in an absolutely wonderful way. There's a particular scene relatively early on when things have started going wrong. It's hard to do a plot synopsis of this one. I realise I haven't done it. So the plot synopsis is that early on in this girl Amy's shift, like some stuff is broken, and there's some stuff that's been soiled, and her and a woman called Ruth Ann are pulled to one side by their manager to basically be like, I need you to do a weird kind of shift, like a late shift, to help me find out who it is that's broken in. And they also end up coming across 2 other of their co-workers when they're there that night, because they think it's ghost stuff, or at least one of them does. And I'm going to leave the rest of that for you to read, to see how that goes on. But the important thing to know is that it's also playing on the idea of the panopticon. I can never say this properly, but you should know what I mean. The panopticon prison system. If you don't know about that, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's basically I believe it's something like a guard tower here, and then you've got all the prisoners around so that you can always see them like 100% of the time. I think it was a thing in the US, or it might have been the UK, or both maybe, but it was like proposed, but then they realised it's like super unethical or something. There's this scene where you've got one of the guys who, so one of the people who was like there for ghosts, and Amy, who's our third person but POV character, and they're walking and they're trying to find their way back to where they originally were, and they just keep going round in the same circle, and they're going, how are we doing this? How are we ending up in the same place over and over and over again? And Matt starts filming, or at least he looks into his viewfinder and realizes that if he looks forward through his own eyes, he's, say, looking at living rooms, but if he holds his camera up and looks at the viewfinder, that's kitchens. I hope I said 2 different rooms there. Yeah, he's looking at living rooms and the camera's seeing kitchens. And they realise that what they had to do to get back is look through the viewfinder, climbing over shit, and that's how they have to make their way back. And that's the first real sign. Well, as you know, it's the second sign, but the first real tangible sign that the store itself is fucking with you, and that the architecture is warped in some way. You actually do get a sign of that early on, where Amy Ann was talking about where she had to have a meeting somewhere, and she walked and she kept feeling like she was getting lost and stuff. And yeah, that's the early sign, but it feels like an offhanded comment at the time. I like little things like that do feel like offhanded comments, that don't feel like they're being, hey, one time I got lost when I was walking to a meeting. I got lost because I kept feeling like I was going round in circles. It's not really obvious. It does feel like an offhanded comment. It's just one of those things where you're talking about it and you go back and you go, oh wait, that's like, yeah, she did say that. I forgot, genuinely, until I was talking about the filming. But yeah, that scene was so good, and the seance is basically what buggers everything up. Because I genuinely think if they hadn't done the seance, because yes, they do decide to do one of those, I don't think it would have gone as badly as it all did. And yet, they do. And just, yeah, the way that tension's built in this is very different to that, because obviously the tension in My Best Friend's Exorcism is really centered around a person. Obviously, it's what's going to happen to Gretchen. It's sort of centered around 2 people, but it is centered around the troubles of a single person and how she's going to get better. Whereas this, you've not only got that group dynamic, but it's also like the issue here is not a single person being possessed. It looks like it might be at first, where the guy that they find who's been breaking in at night, or maybe breaking in at night, that's never made particularly clear. From the moment they do the seance with him, it becomes clear that he is not quite who he says he is. Or he is, but there is something. Has been possessed by the old warden, or jailer, if you will, from the prison that the current building has been built on. And it all goes tits up from that seance, where it looks like he's like cut himself on his throat, but then somehow he gets up and starts walking around, and his voice, and he's not him anymore, and it's everything in this book kept me wanting to just next page, next page, next page. I just wanted to keep going with this, even when I was fucking terrified. Like, there's a particular scene where one character, I'm not going to say who, but that chair I described earlier, I believe that's actually described just after this character has been strapped to basically that chair. And there's talking about all the restraints being tightened and tightened and tightened around her head, her chest, her arms, her legs, her feet, and how everything's just like digging into the skin. And it talks about like the circulation slowly cutting off and things getting painful until it goes cold, until you can't feel anything anymore. And how everything just feels like it's clawing in. And I was reading this and I could feel my whole body, just like the tension in my body was just, every muscle was just tight and tense, and it was rough. But at the same time, as much as I wanted to go, why am I still reading this? This is awful. This is like grim as shit. I couldn't stop. I could not stop reading. I wanted to know what would happen next. And at every stage, I was just... I mean, I know I'm never going to feel the same when I walk into an IKEA. Although IKEA is mentioned in this book, it's sort of half not an IKEA, not based on an IKEA, but I think it's also based off... I think there's also taking from... I don't know if Americans have this or something similar, but in the UK we have something called JYSK, JYSK, which is frankly a bit of an IKEA knockoff, and I'm wondering if Americans have the same thing. Yeah, because ORSK obviously is sounding a bit like JYSK. I am curious, but yeah, I just... this book is incredible, and the way it looks at, you know, the idea of working retail and it feeling like you're just going in spirals some days, and how it's just, it keeps going on, and just every scene is just, it's here. I'm absolutely going to read that book again, even if I will be terrified, because that book is genuinely scary, but super entertaining at the same time. Again, I can do horror books, I cannot do horror films, but that book, 10 out of 10, properly how I want to see modern horror as well. It feels like it is looking at, you know, modern issues with the idea of the way that working in retail works, and just generally how those buildings are on a consumer level, and just all of that. And, you know, the subtlety is not particularly there with the idea of feeling like a prisoner, obviously, with all the ghosts being prisoners. That's not a spoiler. Frankly, I've already said it's built on a prison, and that is brought up early on. You can imagine who the ghosts are. But, you know, the subtlety is not entirely present, but somehow it also doesn't feel like you're being kicked in the face with the message. It doesn't well enough, and I think it's because it doesn't overtly actually say, oh, I feel like one of these ghosts kind of thing. I feel like just like these prisoners. It never says anything like that, so like even if it's not subtle, it's also not cringe-inducingly overt. So yeah, I'm 100% gonna be reading more Grady Hendrix in the future. I will probably read those two again at some point, especially knowing if I keep Audible, those are actually books that are included on the membership. They're not ones that I had to pay for with like an extra credit or something. So I think there were a couple others of his that were also included, so I'll probably be reading them at some point soon in the future. Right, next week, been a while. I don't remember the last book I actually read from the box. Let's not look. we have mainstream. I actually don't know where I've kept that down there. So, mainstream, multiple authors. This is an anthology of short stories. I have it because one of my friends contributed to it, and you gotta support your friend. And I've been meaning to read this since I got it, but again, it is me. So I have this horrible feeling. It was last year, okay? It wasn't quite as long as I thought it was. For a second I thought that I had waited a really, really long time for this, but no, it was last year. So it's still, you know, new enough for me to not feel completely awful. And maybe I will do an audiobook as well, or there's actually a chance that this book will, like, the next week's review might be really long anyway, just because I'm reviewing a lot of stories rather than one long one, so who knows about that. So yeah, you're definitely getting mainstream. That is, again, by multiple authors from Incandescent Publishing. And yeah, I will see you next week. Check out my Twitch. I've been streaming a little bit. I don't have a set schedule for it, but the link will be in the description if you want to follow that. I do art on there mostly, and occasionally other stuff. Like the first thing I did on there was dye my hair, and I'm thinking of just doing a bunch of little things on there that aren't this, where I just get to sit down, chat to people. It's nice. It's a nice way for me to kind of wind down in an evening as well. So yeah, go follow me on there. I will see you all very shortly. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Right.